I will never forget that spring in Chicago. The March chill had just begun to fade when my daughter, Harper, only 6 years old, started complaining about pain in her legs every night. At first I thought she was just sore from dance sessions at kindergarten. I would gently massage her legs before bed, telling her stories, trying to soothe her. Harper often snuggled into my chest and whispered in a tired voice, "Mommy, my legs really hurt. It feels like something's scraping inside." That sentence made my heart clench, but I tried to reassure both of us by blaming the weather, or the usual growing pains in children. But a few days later, Harper skipped her favorite weekend activity, the park. "Can we skip it today, Mommy? My legs hurt too much." I looked up from the sink, my hands still covered in suds, and saw her curled up on the couch, pale, clutching her calves tightly. That's when I knew something was wrong. I took Harper to a pediatrician the following week. After a general checkup, we were referred to an orthopedic specialist. From there, everything spiraled. Dr. Thomas, a man in his early 40s with deep-set eyes and a calm voice, examined Harper carefully. He pressed on her thigh, rotated her ankle, asked many questions. Then he paused, glanced at me quickly, and I knew. He had seen something. "We need to take an X-ray and run a few more tests," he said, his tone neutral but heavy. I nodded, swallowing the lump of dread in my throat. I went alone to get the results. Harper stayed home with her grandma. When I walked into the clinic, Dr. Thomas was already waiting, the file open in front of him. His face wasn't as composed as the first time. "Miss Stella," he hesitated, then placed the films on the light board. "We found an abnormal growth in Harper's left femur. It appears to be an aggressive lesion and needs to be evaluated by a bone oncology specialist." I froze. I could hear the click of his pen on the desk, the hum of the heater behind me, but not the sound of my own heartbeat. "Surgery is necessary," he continued. "We need to remove the affected area before it spreads. It's a rare form of bone tumor. If treated early, the recovery rate is much higher." I went ice cold, as if someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over me. My legs buckled slightly as I gripped the chair. My vision blurred. Harper, just 6 years old, how could she handle surgery? How would I come up with that kind of money? I left the clinic like a ghost, holding a referral slip that read, "Children's Cancer Hospital, urgent admission." I walked down the long hallway, my heels echoing against the tile floor. Every step scraped my chest. By the time I reached the parking lot, I couldn't take another step. I leaned against the car door, the wind from Lake Michigan biting my cheeks, and whispered unconsciously, "Harper, Mommy won't let you go through this alone." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat alone in the kitchen, the soft yellow light casting shadows on the table, where I'd placed the diagnosis and referral papers. Beside them was a half-silk water bottle and a small wooden box where I used to keep Harper's birthday cards. Now it held test receipts, insurance forms, and a printed estimate of the surgery costs. The final number was $27,800. I didn't even have $800. Blake, my husband, came home late. He dropped his bag on the chair and looked at me like he already knew everything. I told him the full story, voice flat, forcing back tears. But when I mentioned the number, my lips trembled. "We have to find a way," I said. "There has to be a way." Blake walked over, sat beside me, and held my hand. "I'll take more shifts, whatever I can. You know my mom still has a little savings." "I'll try asking her." I didn't respond. His mother, Evelyn, had never been warm to me. Since Harper was born, she'd barely visited. I didn't expect anything from her. The next morning, I submitted a request to work extra hours at the university library where I was a part-time research assistant. I also started messaging old friends, former coworkers, classmates, anyone I still had contact with. Some replied right away, offering kind words and what help they could. Others said they were struggling. A few never responded. I scraped together everything: unused vacation pay, sold old electronics, even boxed up my personal book collection, the one I dreamed of passing down to Harper someday. That dream would have to wait. Blake picked up extra shifts delivering for a late-night courier service. He came home around 6 a.m., exhausted, just enough time to nap before heading to his day job. I worried about his health but said nothing. We both knew we were racing against time. I placed a white envelope in the kitchen drawer, writing Harper's name on it. Every bit we earned went in there, folded carefully like it held all our hope. Some days Blake would bring home just $23 in tips. On others, I'd earn $70 helping the principal reorganize old storage files over the weekend. Neither of us said it out loud, but I knew we were both considering selling the car. Blake needed it for work. I used it for Harper's appointments. We didn't discuss it, but the thought hovered like a shadow. Amid the chaos of work, forms, and fear, I kept our bedtime routine. Harper had grown visibly thinner but still smiled when I told her stories about the little rabbit lost in the forest, helped home by birds. "Mommy, will I get to come home too?" I swallowed the lump in my throat, kissed her forehead. "Soon, sweetheart, I promise." 1 week later, I got a call from Caroline, an old friend who now worked as an accountant at a law firm. She'd organized an internal fundraiser, raised $2,000. I broke down crying in the middle of the grocery store parking lot. Alone, under the midday sun, I laughed and cried like I'd lost my mind. That night, Blake came home with a scraped arm from a minor accident during a delivery shift. I rushed to the door, wiping the blood while asking, "Are you okay?" He gave a tired smile. "As long as Harper lives, every wound is worth it." I looked at him and a strange wave of emotion rose in me. Gratitude, pity, and a small, unshakable unease I couldn't yet name. Every night, once Harper fell asleep, I opened my laptop and started reading medical websites and forums about pediatric bone tumors. I noted down doctors' names, bookmarked reputable centers. There were moments I nearly collapsed on the desk from exhaustion, but still, I pulled myself back up. I couldn't stop. 4 weeks passed. We had managed to raise over $14,000. Halfway there. I didn't know how we did it, but every morning when I saw Harper's eyes, I found another reason to keep going. There were no other options. No room for mistakes. And no longer could I trust anyone completely, not even the one I once thought was my only anchor. After nearly 3 months of scraping by, Blake and I finally had the full amount, $27,800. I counted each bill, palms sweating. Part of it was from donations, the rest was a high-interest loan Blake had taken from a friend in Denver. The rates were brutal, but I didn't care. All I could focus on was this. My daughter Harper would get the surgery. Her chance at life was finally near. I called the Children's Hospital in St. Paul to confirm the surgery date. The nurse's voice was soft and calm. "We can admit Harper next week. Please complete the payment within 48 hours to secure the schedule." I nodded, my chest feeling light. That night I held Harper close as she slept, her legs relaxed for the first time in weeks. We had survived a storm no one thought we'd make it through. The next morning I organized the paperwork and asked Blake to stop by the bank to transfer the money. I even texted him reminders throughout the morning. He responded with a thumbs-up emoji and said, "I'll go during my lunch break, trust me." And I did. That afternoon, as I stepped out of a meeting with my department chair, my phone rang. It was the hospital. I picked up immediately, thinking they wanted to confirm documents. "Hi, this is Stella, Harper's mother." "Hello?" the woman replied. This time, her tone wasn't as gentle. "We just need to confirm because, as of now, we haven't received any payment for Harper's surgery. If we don't receive it today, we'll have to give her spot to another patient." I froze. "That can't be," I said, lips dry. "My husband already transferred it. He told me he would this morning." "You may want to check with the bank, or with your husband directly." I hung up, hands trembling. I called Blake. 3 rings, then it cut off. I called again. This time, he answered. "Blake, I just got a call from the hospital. They haven't received the money. Did you do it?" Silence. Then his voice, nervous, barely audible. "I meant to, but something happened." I clenched my bag strap. "What happened?" "My mom called early this morning. She fell down the stairs. The doctor said she needs physical therapy, but insurance won't cover it, and she said she has no one else." My throat closed. "Are you telling me you used our daughter's surgery money to pay for your mom's therapy?" "Oh, Stella, not exactly. I mean, I borrowed it. She promised to pay it back soon, and Harper's surgery, it can be pushed back a few days, right?" I exhaled sharply, my chest tightening. "Blake, your daughter has a tumor in her femur. You know what every single day means in a case like this, and you gave that money to someone who hasn't cared about Harper since the day she was born? Don't talk like that about my mom. I'll say exactly what she did, I cut in, my voice no longer steady. She's never once held her granddaughter, but she had no problem begging you for tens of thousands of dollars and getting it in a matter of hours? I hung up. Everything spun. The room tilted, and I had to lean against the wall to stay upright. One thought echoed in my head: Harper is waiting. And I couldn't let her wait another second. I opened my laptop, logged into my personal account. The balance wasn't enough. I messaged Caroline, the friend who had helped raise funds before, asking if she knew anyone who could lend me money immediately. Then I called the bank to request an overdraft extension. They denied it. My credit was good, but Blake's wasn't. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, feeling like a cloth wrung dry, completely hollow. That night, I didn't look at Blake when he came home. He stepped inside quietly like someone lost. His eyes darted around, avoiding everything. I sat at the dining table, waiting for him to speak. But he said nothing, and I didn't ask. Blake spent the entire evening avoiding me, walking aimlessly, opening cabinets, pouring water he didn't drink, pretending to be busy just to avoid facing me. I sat at the table, the surgery confirmation letter still sitting where I left it. Every glance at it stabbed at my chest. Harper was asleep in her room, still unaware that the operation meant for next week was now indefinitely delayed. And all because of something I hadn't yet dared to admit to myself. Say it, I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. Blake froze. He didn't turn around. Stella, I told you, my mom. It wasn't therapy, I cut him off. She didn't fall, she's not sick. What did you use our daughter's medical money for? Blake turned to face me, eyes darting, voice as small as a schoolboy being scolded. She wanted to go to Europe, specifically Italy and Greece, but there was a discount tour to Turkey. She said it was her lifelong dream. I shot up from my seat. The chair scraped back with a sharp noise that cut through the air like a blade. I stared at him, unable to believe what I had just heard. You mean you transferred nearly $30,000 to your mother for her to go on vacation? He stayed silent. Harper's money. I worked through the entire winter, day and night. Our friends donated, I pawned my belongings, I sold my books, all of it. So your mother could take pictures next to an olive tree? She promised to pay it back, maybe in a few months, from her retirement check or if she sells her car. I couldn't hold it anymore. I slammed my hand on the table. The tears never had a chance. My anger burned them away. She didn't promise. She demanded. And you bowed your head. You chose your mother over your daughter. Blake, she's your flesh and blood. He stepped back. He cried. She said she never had a vacation in her life. She said this was her last chance before she got too old to travel. I couldn't stand seeing her like that. You know she raised 3 boys alone. You don't understand the pressure I was under. I burst out laughing, a hollow, bitter laugh so sharp it startled even me. Pressure? You want to talk about pressure? How about watching your daughter cry every night curled up in pain, or hearing the doctor say she might never walk again if we don't operate in time? He looked down at the floor. I'm not a bad person, Stella. I walked up to him, voice low, dry as ash. No. You're not bad. You're just weak. The air in the house thickened. I walked into Harper's room. She was sound asleep, holding her blue stuffed bear. Every time I looked at her, I felt another part of me tear. And it was Blake who had pulled at the seams. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat beside Harper for hours, my mind spinning. One question kept echoing. How could a father do that? The next morning, I checked my phone. There was a notification from Evelyn's social media account, my mother-in-law. The first photo showed her standing in the middle of the Grand Bazaar in Istanbul, holding up a glass of mint tea. The caption read, "Living my best life, a well-deserved reward after a lifetime of sacrifice." I threw the phone onto the bed. At that moment, whatever hope I had for Blake's remorse evaporated. He hadn't been manipulated. He had chosen. He chose his mother. He chose a warped sense of pity over saving the child who carried his blood. I walked out of the bedroom, straight into the kitchen, opened the drawer and pulled out the white envelope I had guarded so carefully. Empty. Not a single dollar. No apology from Blake. No message from Evelyn. Just silence and a photo of her smiling in the Mediterranean sun. I turned to look at Blake slumped on the sofa, hair disheveled, eyes red. I didn't feel anger anymore. Just a wide, aching emptiness. Blake, I said, my voice calm as cold air. You're no longer part of this journey. I had just 3 days to find nearly $28,000 before the hospital gave Harper's surgery slot to another child. 3 days. 72 hours. I started by calling everyone who had once offered to help. A few people sent a little more. Some stayed silent. Others replied with a curt, "Sorry." I went to the bank. My credit was still decent, but they refused. When they saw Blake was a co-signer on the account, I tried to explain, begged, but rules were rules. I left empty-handed. That afternoon, I returned to a neighborhood in South Minneapolis where I used to tutor English to immigrant families in college. One of the parents, Camila, originally from Guatemala, now worked for a private lending firm. As soon as I said the words emergency loan, she stared at me in silence for a few seconds, then motioned for me to sit down. "Stella, the interest is steep. You'll owe nearly $600 a week. Are you sure?" "There's no other choice," I said. "If I don't act, my daughter won't get another chance." Camilla didn't ask further. 10 minutes later, I signed the papers. The funds were wired that day. I walked out of the building just before 7 p.m., cold rain starting to fall. In my hand was the receipt confirming the transfer to the Children's Hospital in St. Paul. I had never felt so relieved, even knowing that debt was waiting just around the corner. When I got home, Blake was gone, no note. The living room was quiet. The only sign he'd been there was the jacket he left draped over the chair. I didn't care anymore. All I needed to know was that Harper's surgery was now possible. The next morning, I called the hospital to confirm payment. The nurse on the line replied with a bright, cheerful voice, "We've received it. Harper will be admitted on Tuesday. Everything's being prepared." I sat down on the floor, still holding my phone. Tears dropped one after another. Not from pain, but because I had just saved my daughter. Harper didn't know the full story. I only told her we were going to stay at the hospital for a few days to fix her hurting leg. She nodded, her eyes still shining with a smile. The surgery was scheduled for the morning. At 7:45 a.m. I waited in the lounge, wearing my worn-out brown coat, gripping my bag strap like an anchor in the middle of a storm. When the operating room doors closed behind Harper, I felt unbearably small. 4 hours passed, then 5. I paced between 2 long gray benches, not eating, not drinking, not speaking to anyone. I only stopped when Dr. Mitchell, the lead surgeon, walked out. The surgery was a success. He said it simply, then smiled softly. "We've removed the entire tumor. Now comes recovery." I nearly collapsed. Harper was moved to the intensive care unit. I could only see her through a glass window for a few minutes each hour. She was still weak, but her vitals were stable. For the first time in weeks, I saw her lips move faintly. I placed my hand on the cold glass, eyes stinging. "I'm right here, sweetheart. I'm always here." Blake didn't show up on surgery day. He didn't call either. I didn't look for him. My heart was already too empty to be disappointed one more time. On the 3rd day post-surgery, Harper was moved to a regular room. I pulled my bed next to hers, read books, told stories, braided her hair, like nothing existed outside of just the two of us. That evening, while I was peeling an apple, I heard a knock at the door. I opened it. It was Blake. He stood there, hair messy, his face noticeably thinner, holding a cheap bouquet of daisies and a small bag of fruit. "I know I don't deserve it," he said. "But I want to see Harper." I didn't say anything, I just stepped aside so he could enter. He walked to the bed. Harper was asleep. He stood there for a long time, staring at her, then turned around, eyes red. "I'm sorry," he said, barely above a whisper, like he was speaking to himself. You did what I should have done, thank you. For not giving up. I didn't respond. That thank you came far too late. Harper had been transferred from the ICU to a regular room on the 4th day. The nurse gently straightened her blanket, smiled at me and wished me a good day before leaving. The room grew quiet. The only sound was the soft beep of the heart monitor. I sat beside the bed, carefully slicing the apple into small pieces, eyes never leaving Harper. She was still weak, but her gaze had regained its light. Every blink felt like a breath of relief. Just as I placed a slice onto her tray, the door burst open. "Surprise!" a woman's voice rang out, loud and confident. I turned my head. "Evelyn?" My mother-in-law walked in, wearing a bright orange scarf, her sun-kissed skin gleaming under the hospital's white lights. She dragged a small suitcase and swung a duty-free bag from the airport, like it was a prize. Behind her was Blake, his shoulders hunched like he'd been dragged there. I froze, my heart turning cold as if a block of ice had slammed into my chest. Evelyn strode straight to Harper's bed like nothing had happened. "I brought you some gifts from Istanbul, sweetheart," she said, unloading items onto the table beside the bed. Handmade dolls, packets of Turkish candy, a flower-embroidered handkerchief. "The Mediterranean is beautiful, darling. Warm sun, delicious food, and the people there are so friendly." I stayed silent. So did Blake. Harper lay still, her eyes wide open, watching each item being placed in front of her like she was trying to make sense of it all. Evelyn beamed and held out a camel-shaped hand puppet. "This one's for you, so you can remember Grandma's first trip abroad." Harper slowly sat up, her tiny eyes locked on her grandmother. A heavy silence fell over the room, sharp enough to cut through. Then Harper spoke, her voice weak but clear. "Grandma, did you use my surgery money to go on vacation?" Evelyn froze. Her smile shattered. She blinked, her hand with the puppet recoiling as if it had been burned. Blake looked away, his eyes dropped to the floor. I didn't need to say a word. Harper's question was the final blow. The room grew cold. Evelyn stammered. "Both? Who told you that? I just borrowed it." "You don't really understand grown-up money stuff." Harper didn't answer. She turned her face away, eyes welling with tears. I saw her little shoulders tremble, and when I reached out she gripped my hand tightly like it was her last safe place. I turned to Evelyn. "You're not welcome here anymore." "Stella, don't be unreasonable," Evelyn objected. "I'm her grandmother, I have rights." "You have no rights," I cut her off, my voice steady and low. "You weren't here when she had fevers, when she cried through the night in pain, but you were in the Grand Bazaar picking out scarves. You had time for mint tea, but not a single phone call." Blake stepped toward me, as if to mediate. "Stella, she didn't mean..." I turned to him. "Don't speak." Both of them fell silent. "I tried to believe," I said slowly. "I hoped you would be a father. But you made your choice. And now, I'm making mine." I turned back to Evelyn. "Leave. And don't come back." Evelyn opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but then turned away. She hastily gathered her things, pulled her suitcase out of the room. Right before stepping out the door, she glanced back at Harper. But the little girl had already turned her face toward the wall. Blake stood frozen for a moment, then nodded slowly and followed his mother. The door closed. I turned back to the bed. Harper was lying down again, still holding my hand. I stroked her hair and kissed her forehead. "I'm here, it's just you and me now." 3 days after that confrontation at the hospital, I filed for divorce. Not out of revenge, not because I hated Blake, but because I couldn't continue life with the man who put pity for his mother above the life of his child. To me, it was no longer a marriage. It was a burden disguised as love. Blake didn't object. When he received the court papers, he called only once. His voice was raspy and he said just one sentence. "I understand." Then he hung up. That was all I needed. Harper was still healing well. The incision was getting better and she had begun walking again with the help of small crutches. Each step she took felt like it erased a wound I had once swallowed silently. But I knew the only way to protect her in the long run was to sever the past completely. I moved out of our old apartment the following week. We rented a small studio in East Minneapolis, just 1 bedroom, but it was bright, quiet, and close to a park. I placed Harper's bed next to the window where morning light filtered through the leaves. I brought very little with me, only essentials. Everything else I left for Blake. I didn't want to carry anything that belonged to us. I started working 2 jobs at once, tutoring at a community center in the mornings and waitressing at a small cafe nearby in the evenings. Harper stayed in a physical rehab support group at the hospital. On days I couldn't make it in time, the head nurse kept her a bit longer. They adored Harper, and I was more grateful than I could ever put into words. I learned how to manage everything on my own, from fixing leaky pipes, patching electrical sockets, to rearranging Harper's desk when she cried that it was too far from the sunshine. We didn't have much, but I felt lighter than I had in my entire marriage. No more blame, no more silent dinners, no more waiting for someone who had stopped choosing me long ago. One day, while cleaning the bathroom, I overheard Harper murmuring to her teddy bear, "Daddy's not coming, huh? But that's okay, Mommy's enough." I froze behind the half-go door. I didn't cry, I didn't fall apart. I just clenched my fists tight, as if swearing to myself that I would never let my child feel unloved again. Blake showed up once, a few weeks after I moved. He knocked around dusk. His eyes were sunken, dark circles prominent, and he held nothing but a single sheet of paper, the uncontested divorce agreement. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "I know I've lost everything." I took the paper without a word. Harper wasn't home. She was at her weekend physical therapy session. Right before he turned to leave, Blake hesitated. "Stella, if someday she asks why her dad isn't around," and looked up, "I'll tell her the truth, but in a child's language." He nodded, offered a faint smile, then walked down the dim hallway without looking back. We haven't spoken since. I officially became a single mom. No wedding ring, no one beside me when the night fell, but I felt peace. Peace. Because I no longer had to bargain for love, no longer had to beg anyone to put my daughter first. I started growing my hair out again, something Blake never liked. Every morning I braided Harper's hair, then mine. We wore matching gray sweaters, slipped on our old canvas shoes that were still warm enough, and went to the park on weekends. That's where she'd rest her head on my lap and whisper, "Mom, you're more like a superhero than a mom." I laughed, not to hide tears this time, but because I truly felt strong. No cape, no one standing behind me, just me and my daughter. Her first steps after surgery, though still cautious, were the most miraculous thing I had ever witnessed. We had been living in the little apartment for 8 months. Everything slowly found its rhythm. I still worked 2 jobs, but had cut back on evening shifts so I could take Harper to therapy and read to her before bed. Life wasn't easy, but it no longer felt heavy. I had learned to live without relying on anyone. And Harper, she was growing up with a smile no longer shadowed by fear. Then one Saturday afternoon, just after I folded the last load of laundry, the doorbell rang. I walked over and opened it. It was Blake. He stood there in an old coat, empty-handed, his face noticeably gaunt. The dark circles under his eyes ran deep, like someone who hadn't slept in days. I had never seen him like that. No excuses, no awkward fidgeting, just a quiet that felt close to surrender. "I just want to see her for a moment," he said, his voice low. I thought about turning him away, but after a few seconds of silence, I stepped aside. He entered, removed his shoes carefully, then stood near the door, hesitant to move any closer. Harper was at the table drawing. She turned when she heard the sound. There was no shout, no running into arms, just a long, steady stare. That 6-year-old girl looked at her father like she was trying to match the face in her memory, with the man standing before her. Blake sat down, keeping some distance. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a pink marker. Something Harper used to love. "I missed you," he said. Harper didn't respond right away. She simply nodded slightly, then turned back to her paper. But I noticed her hand trembling as she picked up her pen. Blake stayed about 10 minutes. The room was heavy with silence. Finally he stood, placed the marker on the table, and softly said, "I know I don't deserve it, but I'll always remember both of you." I didn't say a word. When the door clicked shut behind him, Harper still hadn't turned her head. That night, as I was folding blankets, Harper spoke up. "Mom, is Dad coming back again?" I looked up, into her little eyes, clear but already carrying smudges of pain. I sat beside her, wrapped my arm around her, and quietly answered, "I don't know, sweetie." She looked at me, waiting for something more certain. But I didn't promise. I just held her hand and gently said, "But I'm here, and just the two of us, that's enough. Just us." Harper leaned her head on my shoulder. She didn't ask again. She didn't cry. She simply let out a tiny sigh. So soft, so grown up. I knew then that at her age, she already understood more than I had ever hoped she wouldn't have to. The next morning, I made breakfast like usual. Harper came out holding her old teddy bear, then smiled at me. "Mom, you know what? I'm gonna draw another picture, but this time it'll only have two people." I looked at her and smiled gently. Not a victorious smile, just a quiet peace blooming in my chest. We ate breakfast next to the cracked open window, spring air flowing in, scented with damp earth and hope. Outside, the sky was starting to turn blue again, and I knew, from here on out, things would bloom. Slowly, but surely. The story of me and Harper isn't just about overcoming illness, it's about rediscovering myself through the wreckage. I learned how to stand when no one was there, how to be a mother, a safe place, both protector and healer. Harper gave me the strength to keep going. And now, every morning when I see her smile, I understand. Sometimes losing someone is how you find peace. With real love, just the two of us are enough to build a home. What do you think about Stella and Harper's journey? Share your thoughts below. Don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt and meaningful stories about life, family, and the tough choices we face.